Close your eyes. Picture one world with one ribbon of land that runs from polar night to equatorial noon. No ocean stands between neighbors. Only a long breath of soil and stone that never tore apart. If calm journeys like this help you rest, subscribe now and tell me in the comments which path you would walk first. A long west to east road through warm plains, or a north to south line across deep forests and snow-bright passes. Your answer helps choose the next branch we build together. We begin on a quiet shore where the sea touches a wall of land. The waves bow and slide back as if the planet itself were breathing. Turn inland and feel the wind weaken step by step. The air dries, shadows sharpen, and the sky becomes a clear, hard blue. This is continentality. A measured pattern on very large land masses where interiors grow dry and where days heat quickly and nights cool fast. Scientists observe this today across Eurasia and North America, and they see the same pattern in climate models that simulate wider shapes of land under the same sun and the same steady turn of the planet. A river joins from far highlands. It carries fine silt from rock worn down by ice. Rain in time. In wet years the river reaches the sea. In dry years the air asks for its water first. That is not failure. It is the water cycle working in a dry belt. Heat lifts water, wind carries it, and rain returns far away. Many supercontinent simulations suggest strong interior aridity and coasts with broad humid seasons that act like large monsoons. Our walk follows those findings, and we mark clearly when we imagine details the models do not resolve. Climb until the land rises into a long mountain wall. Mountains on a single continent act like valves. When ocean air is pushed upslope it cools, water condenses, and rain falls. The windward side greens. The leeward side rests under a rain shadow. This is not guesswork. It is everyday physics that shows from the Andes to the Himalaya. Air that rises cools. Cooler air holds less water. The excess falls as rain or snow. The shadow side waits. We cross a high pass. The air thins, and a clean mineral scent rides each breath. On the far slope the forest spreads like a soft green sea. Leaves shine with small beads. Streams talk in the shade. Insects hum a steady note that feels like a gentle current under the day. You kneel to drink. The water tastes like cloud and stone. The ground holds your weight as if it had been waiting all along. These sensory steps belong to our thought experiment. The science beneath them remains simple and firm. Cooling air gives moisture away to leaves and soil, and valleys gather that gift into rivers that net the land. Step from the trees onto a broad coastal plain where many rivers meet an inner sea. Tides cross flats that shine like mirrors. The air smells of salt, leaf, and the faint sweet of crushed flowers. Storms visit in long patient sessions more than in sudden fits. Fog walks in like a careful friend. Warm water beside warm land can deepen a seasonal draw of moist air inland. Climate models for persistent supercontinents often show this pattern. Long soaking rains that move with the year in great arcs. Look seaward and think about currents. The ocean is not a still canvas. It moves in wide gyres driven by wind and by the turning of the planet. Coastlines steer those gyres the way banks steer a river. A single gathered continent would reshape those loops, shifting where heat travels along the edge of the land. Slow changes in current paths change the timing and strength of rain and fog. Oceanographers test such effects with models and compare the results with evidence stored in ancient sediments and fossil plankton. The broad lesson holds. Adjust the coast and the conveyor of heat adjusts with it. Now turn inland again. Roads here would be the veins of daily life. Ships would still slide along coasts and across inland seas. But the main lines of exchange would run over ground. Ideas would pass along valleys and over saddles. Languages would borrow and forget who owned a word first. Music would travel like a lantern, faint at first, then warm in the next pair of hands. This is an inference grounded in what we see on linked land corridors today. When borders of water shrink, land roads thicken. Connection brings gifts and prices. Flat belts of steppe and desert can be sensitive to a late start to the rains. Mountain passes turn into gates that armies remember and markets tax. Inner seas become great marketplaces, and also narrow points where a few decisions shape many lives. These are realistic trade-offs. Environmental stress and human choice braid together, no matter how the map is drawn. Evening lowers itself like a kind hand. Heat lifts off the ground and flows away. Sound travels farther and cleaner. Crickets speak in sheets of rhythm. A small night hunter pads along a dry channel and pauses with its nose lifted. Stars appear like old friends who know when to arrive. The pale bridge of our galaxy leans over the land. The sky does not care how continents arrange themselves. Yet the sky works on us all the same. The science that holds this scene is steady. Land releases heat faster than water, so interiors swing wider between day and night. The feeling that holds this scene is older than speech. Warm rock, cool air, a world that hums instead of shouts. At dawn we walk into a basin where the crust stretches. The ground smells faintly of iron and warmth. The land steps down in long blocks. Lakes gather in the low places. Scientists call these rifts. In our history, some rifts widened into oceans. In this scenario, many would hover for long ages as chains of lakes and shallow inland seas. The reason is mechanical. Tectonic plates still move because deep rock flows slowly and inner heat rises. If the pull never completes a full tier, water collects without opening blue distance to the horizon. Shorebirds would stitch those margins with quick feet. Reeds would write thin green cursive on the wind. Our details are gentle imagination. The frame remains real. We pause and lay out 3 firm lines before we wander farther. Large landmasses grow dry interiors and quick cooling nights because land does not store heat the way water does. Mountain walls place rain on one side and shadow on the other because rising air must give up water as it cools. Warm coasts that face warm seas can host long soaking rainy seasons when seasonal heating draws moist air inland. These lines are the bones of the chapter. The rest is careful muscle and quiet breath. Now we follow a river from its high source to its quiet end. The headwaters begin near snow-bright ridges, made by patient collisions of land with land. Evidence for such collisions in our world includes belts of deformed rock, high plateaus, and minerals that crystallize under great pressure and temperature. None of that evidence requires oceans to stand between the colliding pieces. It only requires motion and time. Our one continent would still have both. As the river gathers strength, it swings around shoulders of stone. Meanders form, tighten and sometimes cut off, leaving oxbow lakes that rest like bent mirrors on the floodplain. During high water seasons, the river lays down thin sheets of silt that build rich soils. In many places, people would choose to live a little back from the banks where water likes to wander. They would learn the moods of the river, plant when the ground first softens, and harvest when the air first grows thin and gold. This is not romantic frosting. It is the agriculture of patience that grows wherever rivers and long land corridors meet. We step through a town that faces morning sun and river breeze. Roofs hold flat stones that warm in daylight and shed heat into the cool night air. Workshops open onto the street. Metal sings. Bread breathes. Dyes bloom in tubs the color of plums and tea. Traders speak names from far valleys as if they were kin. They are not boasting. They are living within a web of roads that do not need sails. In a place like this, law grows from shared habit and shared risk. A cart breaks and 10 hands lift. A rumor of a late monsoon moves and the market shifts without a shout. Beyond the town, the river widens into a low inland sea. Its surface carries a skin of light that moves with the wind. Reeds border the shallows. Fish ripple the dark under the sun. Small boats work the near water while barges float grain and timber along main channels to ports that smell of salt, resin, and citrus peel. In a one-continent world, many such seas would sit where rifts almost won. They would host rings of cities that swap memory and craft. From these circles, ideas would move inland with the regularity of tides. We must also speak of risk without drama. Low basins that rely on seasonal rains can suffer when winds fail or when faraway currents redirect heat for a season or two. Evidence from our world shows that such shifts can be enough to test a food system. Models of altered currents around different coastlines indicate that timing and strength of rain belts can change. Our calm thought experiment honors that. People here would store grain, dig cisterns, and write thin books of lessons on how to travel lean through a hard year. Those books would sit beside the hearth the way maps hang near a door. Horizon light softens and colors the water with honey and smoke. Lamps begin to appear in the towns along the shore. Each lamp is a small sun, each window a promise to return. A musician in a doorway plucks a low instrument, that sits exactly where a tired chest likes to rest. You feel the body slow. You feel the mind loosen its grip. The wide geography outside becomes the quiet geography inside. We close the chapter the same way we opened, precise and gentle. Facts keep the floor steady. Land stores and releases heat differently than water. Mountain walls sort rain, and coasts beside warm seas breathe long wet seasons when the calendar turns a certain way. Upon that floor we place a soft rug of imagination, roads that connect more often than seas divide, markets that flower where passes set a price on slope and snow, and towns that watch an inner sea as if it were a polished piece of sky. If this walk helped you rest without losing the thread, subscribe and tell me which branch you choose next, colder with taller mountains and wider snow lines, or greener with long monsoon belts and river gardens that rarely dry. Your vote becomes our map. Let the last images fade. A night rises from the water and climbs the air with a patient hand. Somewhere a lantern swings on a wooden pier. Wood answers water with a slow knock. The road is long, the world is kind. Sleep well. Close your eyes and wake inside a quieter morning. Mist hangs over an inner sea that looks like a polished piece of sky. Reeds draw thin green lines where the water meets the land. A small boat rocks against a wooden post and makes that soft sound that always feels older than speech. We are continuing the same calm thought experiment while keeping our feet on firm ground with what geographers and oceanographers know about coasts, currents, and seasonal winds. If these slow journeys help you rest and think clearly, subscribe now and tell me in the comments what you would explore along a shore like this. The markets at the river mouth, the islands that shelter the bay, or the long road that follows the dunes. Your answer helps us choose the next branch with care. The air is warm but not heavy. That is the signature of water sharing its mood with land. Large bodies of water change temperature more slowly than rock and soil, so mornings near an inner sea often begin gentle and even. Later the sun will draw a little wind from the water toward the land as air warms and rises over the shore. That onshore breeze is a small daily cousin of the larger seasonal winds that many call monsoons. The physics is measured and simple. Warm air rises, pressure shifts. Cooler moist air flows in to take its place. Models that simulate a single very large continent often produce stronger seasonal wind reversals along broad coasts and gulfs. Our scene belongs to the thought experiment. The mechanism beneath it belongs to fact. We walk a packed earth path that follows a levee built by many hands. The river was allowed to flood lightly in winter and spring, and was guided in summer. The town decided long ago not to fight water, only to nudge it. That choice came from lessons learned by watching flood marks on stone, counting rings in driftwood, and reading how reeds and sedges climb a little higher after a wet year. This is not romance. It is community science. Careful notes made by practical people who prefer listening to shouting. On the quay, a woman finishes coiling rope the color of old straw. She nods toward the channel where slow barges move like patient beetles. Their cargo gives off a sweet grain smell that mixes with resin from timber rafts tied along the far bank. A boy runs past with a basket of clay cups still warm from the kiln. Nothing in the picture needs ships that cross blue distances. A single continent encourages corridors of trade that behave like living rivers, predictable, steady, resilient to single points of failure. That is an inference supported by what we see wherever roads and inland waterways line up with long belts of settled land. We hire a skiff and slide out onto the water. Beneath the boat, green fronds wave in a current that moves more like breath than like stride. The pilot points to an opaque band that runs along the middle of the channel and explains that it is the river's vein, denser with silt, cooler from high country melt. You can test this with a hand over the side. The temperature shift is small but real. This matters. Temperature and mineral content alter density, and density helps decide how water layers and moves. The same principles scale up in the world ocean, where gradients in temperature and salinity help drive deep loops of circulation, often called the global conveyor. In an inner sea tucked against a single continent, these patterns would be simpler and more local, yet they would still knit heat and salt and motion into a quiet engine beneath the surface. The skiff noses into a pocket of shade under a low bridge. You can hear the difference in sound, the slap of small waves against stone, The dull drum of feet above, the distant bell of a barge calling for the lock, echo carries the shape of the place. Under wide vaults the tone is round and generous. Under tight beams the notes turn quick and bright. Sensory details like these belong to our imagined walk, but the rule that sound reveals architecture is factual and used by scientists who study caves, forests, and even the living rooms of whales. Past the bridge the town gives way to salt marsh. Here the land and water braid so closely that either could claim the other. Egrets step like white stitches through the channels. The mud smells rich, a promise kept through many seasons. This fringe is not wasted space. It is a machine that filters silt, softens storm energy, and feeds young fish in nurseries among the reeds. That is measured around the world. Wetlands take the punch out of waves, hold nutrients without poisoning the water, and build new ground grain by grain. If a single continent kept many inner seas, this gentle shield would be common and prized. We beach the skiff on a small island made by two channels parting and meeting again like fingers. The day warms and the breeze that began as a whisper becomes a steady page turning. Its direction tells you the season without a calendar. In the warm half of the year air over land rises and invites moist air inland. In the cool half of the year the pattern weakens or even reverses, drawing air back toward the water. People here learn to read that exchange the way sailors elsewhere read stars. Many models of supercontinent climates show broad arcs of these seasonal winds curving along coasts where the land presents a long, continuous face to the sea. Our island picnic belongs to the story. The curve of wind on a map belongs to math. From the island you can see low hills beyond the marsh. Dunes, pale as resting animals, hold the line between inner sea and outer ocean. They are stitched together by grasses that bite into the sand with long roots. This is another quiet machine. Dunes form where wind drops its sand load in the wind shadow of plants or driftwood. They flex and walk slowly with the seasons. In healthy belts they protect the low ground behind them from storm waves. In unhealthy belts they fray and allow salt water to reach fields and wells. People in a place like this would weave fences from brush to trap wind-borne sand, plant deep-rooting grasses, and set paths that keep feet from breaking the skin of the slope. None of that is invention. It is field-tested practice in dune countries across our present world. We cross the marsh on a raised way and climb a notch through the dunes to the outer shore. The difference is a small shock. The inner sea had a voice like a cat breathing. The outer ocean speaks with a longer chest. The line of waves rolls in from beyond the far weather. The horizon feels like a thin idea that could break and show you something else behind it. Stand here and you can feel a larger pattern at work. Wind over long distances builds a swell. Swell delivers energy to the coast. Coasts shape the wave and send part of the energy sliding alongshore. That longshore current carries sand drift. Even the story of distant storms. On a coast that belongs to one gathered continent, such a longshore highways would be wide, steady, and seasonally predictable. We walk in the firm sand near the water edge, where foam fizzles like soft soda. The beach is littered with drift that tells clean stories. Smooth sticks from the marsh. Dark ribbons of kelp with air bladders that pop underfoot. Shells with drill holes that say a predator ate without hurry. Nothing here is exotic. It is exactly the ordinary that builds real worlds. You could teach a child the language of coasts with this strand alone, and that child could later build sea walls, restore dunes, or choose where a town should stand. By midday heat curls the air. The onshore wind freshens and builds small white tufts on the sea. The sky wears thin veil clouds that look like the memory of waves. A fisherman with a hat bleached by many summers tells us that in late season the wind turns and blows out to sea for days. The water warms less, the fog is rare, and the fishing changes. He does not need a chart to know this. His bones have kept a ledger for years. Local knowledge is a science with its measurements carried in muscle and habit. On a single continent coast with long, repeating shorelines, that knowledge would move quickly along the road. Good ideas would not have to cross an ocean to meet each other. We spend the hottest hour under a driftwood lean to and speak softly. Heat can make tempers thin. A habit grows in shore towns to set public quarrels for morning or evening when the air makes wiser decisions. Small cultural rules like this are not fantasy. They evolve in response to the weather of a place. In many mountain cultures, loud work rests in avalanche season. In many desert towns, markets lift their voices at dawn and dusk. Here on the long coast, councils meet where shade and wind can enter the room. These are the fine threads that tie environment to behavior without force. As light slides toward evening, we climb a bluff to watch the color of water change from steel to pewter to something like old ink. Far offshore, a line of darker water marks an upwelling tongue where wind has drawn surface water away and allowed cooler, nutrient-rich water to rise. This is a measured event along many of our present coasts where persistent winds blow parallel to shore and the planet turn bends the flow. If a single continent presented very long straight reaches to steady seasonal winds, such upwelling zones would become grand kitchens for marine life. Towns would learn their timing and shape feasts and fasts around those pulses. This is inference, but it leans on hard data from places like the western edges of modern continents. We turn inland at dusk and follow a path through a hamlet tucked into the lee of the bluff. Windows glow with the same soft gold you saw over the inner sea that morning. A baker slides loaves from a clay oven. The smell carries the day in it. Salt, smoke, thyme, and a quiet sweetness from field grains that leaned under wind at noon. A child asked you to write a word in a little book made of bark sheets. You write the name of the shore in your own letters. They look different from the letters on the market signs. That does not bother anyone. In places stitched by roads, scripts travel and learn to sit side by side. Night breathes deeper. Somewhere a bell marks a harbor watch. Insects raise a steady hum in the hollow where the lane bends. The air now flows from land to sea, a soft exhale. Land cools more quickly than water. Pressure over the shore rises a little. Air slides outward along the simplest path. This is the daily partner of the morning breeze, and together they help plants dry their leaves, help roofs shed heat, help a sleeping mind rock in a cradle made by physics rather than story. We close our day on the same firm floor of facts. Water tempers the moods of air more than stone does. Seasonal heating differences between land and sea can organize winds strong enough to carry rain in arcs that last for months. Long coasts can steer currents, shape upwelling kitchens, and write the schedule of fog and sun. Upon that floor we placed a gentle rug of imagination, towns that nudge floods rather than deny them, markets that float on wide inland seas, roads that carry good ideas quickly along a patient shore. If this chapter felt steady underfoot and soft underhand, say so in the comments and tell me what you want to touch next. The islands that guard this gulf, the river cities strung like beads up the long valley, or the storm history written in tree rings in the dune country. Your choice becomes the next quiet line on our map. Let the last light thin and fold. Waves keep their old count, one and another and another. A lantern swings on a pier that never quite sleeps. The scent of salt and bread and wood smoke lingers like a patient friend. The road continues. The night is kind. Sleep well. Morning opens like a slow hand over the long valley. Mist pulls away from water in thin ribbons and reveals a river that swings from bank to bank with the patient confidence of a creature that knows its path. We are keeping the same calm thought experiment while standing on firm ground with what geographers and soil scientists know about floodplains, seasons, and the quiet engineering of water. If these unhurried journeys help you rest and learn, subscribe now and tell me in the comments what part of a river you love most. The headwaters where the sound is bright, the meanders that write S-shapes into the land, or the wide mouth where water meets the sky. Your answer helps choose the next branch with care. Stand at a bend where the outer bank shows a raw face of clay and silt. The river presses here and eats the earth grain by grain. On the inner bank a bar of sand grows, smooth as a sleeping animal. This is not guesswork. Rivers do this wherever flow swings. Fast water on the outside, slow water on the inside. Erosion and deposition are a matched pair. Over years the bend walks across the valley like a slow dancer. Scientists measure these shifts with stakes, aerial images, and the simple arithmetic of discharge and slope. Beyond the bar a line of cottonwood and willow marks the high water line. Each trunk carries a faint necklace of drift where last season rose and then fell. A heron lifts, legs trailing like careful punctuation. The mud is stitched with tracks, otter, raccoon, small bird. Each mark will soften and vanish when the next fresh rises. Floodplains remember in layers, not in sharp lines. That is why the soil here grows deep and dark. Every high water lays down a thin sheet of silt, and a sprinkling of plant remains. Over a long time, this becomes some of the most fertile ground on Earth. Evidence for this is everywhere on our present continents, in the black earths of old valleys, in lowest plains built from wind-blown silt that rivers first made free. We walk along a low natural levee, a slight rise that the river built for itself by dropping heavy grains close to the channel when the water spilled over the bank and slowed. Behind this gentle rim, the land dips into back swamps where water lingers after a flood. Frogs write their steady code there, and dragonflies patrol in glints of blue and steel. When people settle on floodplains, they learn to read these small changes of height. Houses on the rim, fields in the middle ground, reeds and grazing in the back swamp where roots do not mind wet feet. None of this is fantasy. It is the practical geometry of living with water instead of arguing with it. Ahead, the river splits around a low island tufted with reeds, then joins again with a shrug. The map of this valley looks different every decade. Meanders tighten, cut off, and leave oxbow lakes where fish rise under rings of dawn light. Channels shift suddenly in a move geomorphologists call avulsion, most often when a heavy flood finds a shorter path with a steeper fall. In a world with one gathered continent, long gentle gradients would let many rivers build huge braided fans and wide deltas. The fine details we describe now belong to our thought experiment. The rules beneath them belong to physics and to the arithmetic of slope and flow. By mid-morning, we reach a town that sits back from the main channel on an old meander that has become a crescent lake. Streets follow the curve like string around a bow. A market wakes in a square paved with river stones smoothed by the feet of many lifetimes. You smell bread, wet hemp, lamp oil, clay. Metal sings from an awning where a smith draws a bar of cherry light from a charcoal fire. It is a modest town, yet it feels central. Roads run to it from upland farms, and slow barges line its quay. A single continent encourages these inland knots of trade, because nothing has to risk blue distance to move. Ideas arrive like trusted neighbors, not like strangers washed ashore by luck. People here have calendars that breathe with the river. Planning waits for the silt to settle. Harvest begins when the air thins and the sun steps lower at noon. The biggest feast of the year starts on the first evening. The wind swings to the northwest and carries a faint chill down valley. That swing matters. Seasonal winds organize clouds and rain in arcs that can last for months. Many climate models of supercontinent coasts and gulfs suggest strong monsoon-like cycles, even deep inland. Those cycles govern the rhythm of a year. The science behind that claim is careful. Warmed land draws moist air, the air rises and cools, and rain beads the map along the mountain rims and river heads. A teacher in a courtyard shows children how to read a flood mark on the school wall. Here, she says, is where the water climbed in the year of the long rain. Here is where it rose in the year we had to boil well water for a season. Precision does not depend on machines alone. It also lives in habits, in tally sticks, in inked lines on plaster, in stories that repeat without growing teeth. A town that listens to its river long enough becomes an archive. The archive saves lives when the day goes wrong. We step into a granary that smells of straw and a faint sweetness like distant apples. The walls are thick, and vents near the roof let air move slowly through the bins. Grain is lifted in woven slings and poured into tall jars sealed with wax and cloth. A clerk with gentle hands marks each jar with the date and the weight. This is the other side of the feast. The preparation for lean years that every floodplain culture learns after the first hard lesson. Models suggest that if a single continent altered the paths of ocean currents, then some years would bring delayed rains or weaker winds, enough to test a food system. Reserve and exchange are the antidotes, not drama. Outside the granary, a carpenter has set a post and marked it with spans of a standard arm. The town adjusts tasks by the rise and fall of the river on that staff. When the water falls to the mark called good passage, they send heavy carts across the ford to the quarry. When the water climbs to the mark called thin road, they use narrow boats in the side channel. This is nothing more than the invention of thresholds. and it turns a wild partner into a reliable colleague. At midday the air grows warm, and a lake breeze slips along the streets from the crescent behind the town. Laundry on lines turns like small sails. The town understands that water tempers heat, so squares hold fountains. Courtyards wrap around shaded pools, and roofs are built to invite the night wind. Sanitation follows the same logic: soak pits in coarse sand, ditches that slope just enough to carry waste to reed beds, clay pipes that let clean water pass where people gather. Each practice exists because someone watched how water behaves in soil, measured slopes with a string, and chose not to fight gravity. We leave the town along a raised towpath where teams of quiet horses pull barges by rope that whispers through their harness. The barge men work in phrases: haul and settle, haul and settle. Children run along the bank and trade jokes that make everyone older pretend not to smile. The river itself seems to like this company: wide water, low speed, no need for deep keels. On a single continent, many major rivers would be strung with towns like beads and tied together by such towpaths. The pattern is not a fantasy. It is written in the way low-gradient channels behave when given time and patient hands. Past the last warehouses, the valley opens like a book. On the left, an alluvial fan spreads from a mountain mouth, a pale cone where sudden flows have carried gravel and sand and dropped them in a long sigh. Farmers here plant orchards on the upper fan, where soil drains freely and frost settles less often. They plant grains on the middle fan, where the mix of sizes holds water like a good sponge. They graze animals on the lower fan, where the ground stays damp into summer. These choices are as old as planting itself. Evidence rests in terraces and ancient field lines on our present continents, and the same logics would guide hands on a wider world. We stop under a fig tree and listen to the distance. Thunder, but not close. The mountain rim is making weather. When wet air climbs, it cools. Water leaves the air and becomes rain. The windward slopes drink. The leeward slopes rest under a shadow. The streams that rise from those slopes will swell by evening and carry a new story down to the valley floor. If the rise is steady, fields along the low ground will wake to better soil tomorrow. If the rise is sudden, the channel may leap and carve a fresh path. People learn the difference by the color of the clouds and the taste of the wind. A metallic tang can mean hail. A resin scent can mean the storm is spending itself among pines before it gets here. At a ferry crossing, we meet a mason who sets stones like quiet arguments. He is rebuilding a pier that slumped during an earthshake last winter. He says the shock came like a shove under the feet, not a rumble. He points to a line of low hills where faults step the landscape. Even in a single continent world, plates would still grind, subduct, and crumple. Valleys often follow such lines because rock has been fractured there and yields more easily to water. The mason is not frightened by this. He keeps a ledger of safe designs: arches that share load, joints that can move without breaking. Science rests in his hands as much as in any book. Afternoon lays a golden wash over reed beds alive with whispering wings. We pass fish traps woven from willow that narrow to a throat and let little ones pass through. Clean design feels kind. It takes what it needs and leaves tomorrow strong enough to feed the next day. That ethic repeats along the river in quiet ways: a limit on how many logs a raft may carry, a rule that the first water drawn from a common well is for the sick, and the old when the air is cruel. You can track these choices to a source. The river does not argue, it offers. You can match its tone, or you can be taught. Toward evening we reach the delta. The river unbraids into many channels and lays down the last of its silt in a lace that reaches into a shallow sea. Light plays on the water like coins. The air smells of salt and the faint sour of life fermenting into something that will become food again. Deltas are both gift and negotiation. Land grows if the river is allowed to wander and drop its load. Land shrinks if channels are trapped and starved. Evidence for both fates sits on maps of our present coasts. In a world with long, gentle margins, many deltas would be as large as small countries. Green in the wet half of the year, silver in the dry. We end the day on a narrow levee that scarcely rises above the highest reeds. The last boat of the evening slides by. A man at the stern leaning on a pole that knows the bottom as well as his own palm. A small lamp hangs from the bow and throws a circle that wobbles and then steadies. The sky deepens from blue to violet to a near black that holds the first shy stars. In the hush you can hear what the river says when no one presses it with questions. It says the same thing the lungs say, the same thing the sea says, the same thing the planet says as it turns. In and out, give and take, carry and return. We keep our promise to be precise, so we close with firm lines. Floodplains build rich soils through layers of silt laid down by high water. Meanders erode on the outer bank and build bars on the inner bank, and with time cut off bends to leave oxbow lakes. Seasonal winds organized by land and sea temperature differences can time the year for planting, shipping, and rest. River deltas grow when water is allowed to spread and drop its load, and shrink when flow is confined. Upon those bones we placed our gentle walk, a town that reads its wall marks, a granary that hums with reserve, and a valley that treats water as a colleague rather than a foe. If this chapter felt steady underfoot and soft underhand, tell me in the comments which path we should take next. The storm history written in the trees of the dune country, the high cold lakes that mark old tears in the crust, or the long caravan line that crosses the dry interior under a sky full of steady stars. Your vote becomes our next quiet line on the map. Let the dark finish its simple work. Crickets count, water breathes, somewhere a bell marks a slow hour, the road continues, the night is kind, sleep well. Morning arrives as a pale band laid along the edge of the sea. We are in dune country where wind writes soft hills that walk with the seasons. The air tastes faintly of salt and sun-warmed grass. Driftwood throws long blue shadows. The shore is quiet, but it is not empty. Every shape holds a record. Today we will read storms in trees and wind in sand, while keeping our feet on firm ground, with what coastal scientists measure and what tree rings remember. If these slow journeys help you rest and learn, subscribe now and leave a quiet note in the comments. Would you rather trace a storm history through wood and sand, or follow a caravan line across the dry interior under a sky full of patient stars? Your answer helps decide our next branch. We begin beneath a stand of coastal pine that has leaned with the prevailing wind for longer than the oldest person in the village. The trunks are shaped like slow questions. On their western sides the bark is rougher and darker, a weathered armor built one thin layer at a time. This is not imagination. Trees register wind and salt spray in their growth patterns. Records show narrower rings after years when saltburn steals water from needles. Evidence from many coasts shows that storm seasons leave the same thin writing in wood. The science that reads this writing is called dendrochronology. It anchors our steps. A researcher unrolls a paper map on a fallen log. The map shows the coastline as a series of soft black curves, stitched with small marks that look like eyelashes. Those marks are dunes. No two are quite alike. Some run as long crescents. Some sit as nested ovals. Their shapes tell the wind story. Crescent dunes with horns that point downwind form where sand supply is modest and wind direction is steady. Long ridges form where wind often shifts but never quite breaks its rhythm. Scientists who track dunes carry simple tools: a compass, a rod, a notebook, and a patience that matches the wind. Walk with me to the leeward side of the nearest dune. The sand feels cooler where the sun has not yet touched it. Grasses hold the slope with roots that run as deep as the plant is tall. When the wind slows in front of a blade, the sand drops. When wind speeds up over the crest, it picks grains up again and sends them down the slip face in small slides. This is measured in labs and on beaches. It is called saltation when grains hop along the surface. It is called creep when grains roll. The dune is not a heap, it is a machine powered by air. The machine moves as long as sand is supplied and plants allow. At the top we look inland. A string of swales rests between the ridges. In wet months the low places hold shallow lakes no deeper than a person is tall. They flash with sky and hold dragonflies like living jewels. In dry months the swales turn to meadows where children run and sleep without fear. People here learn to plant low shrubs in patterns that break wind into small eddies so the grass can catch its breath. They lay brush fences in long curves that teach sand to stop. These are not dreams. They are practices shared from one coast to another wherever dunes threaten fields and roads. We descend to a grove that sits just behind the oldest ridge. Inside the ring of trees the wind quiets as if a door were closed. A woman in a broad hat carries a small borer no longer than her forearm. She chooses a pine with a straight trunk and smooth bark. She turns the tool slowly into the wood and draws out a thin core. The core shows light and dark bands, one for each year. Wide rings mark good years. Thin rings mark stress. When a great storm pushes salt far inland, the ring for that year narrows across many trees at once. When many cores from many trees show the same pattern, scientists mark a storm year on the shared timeline. This is paleotempestology with wood as witness. Beyond the grove, a low cut through the dune reveals layers, bands of tan, pale gray, and rusty streaks that speak of old groundwater. A geologist kneels and brushes the wall gently. There is a thin horizon of shells halfway down the face, not a beach, but a storm washover. During an extreme event, the sea climbs the beach, leaps the dune, and pours into the swale. When the water falls back, it leaves a sheet of shells and coarse sand. Such layers appear in cores taken from marshes behind barrier islands around our present world. Their dates match known storms in the written record, and older storms inferred from corals and cave sheets. In a world with a single long continent, barrier coasts would still gather these signatures where the shape is right and the sand is eager. We walk along a boardwalk that crosses a marsh the color of old brass. The planks creak in a rhythm that feels like a long wooden breath. Tall rushes part around channels cut by tides that visit and withdraw without fuss. The mud smells clean and old, like bread and iron holding hands. Marsh grass does two jobs at once. It slows water so silt can settle, and it knits the ground together with roots that hold like a net. When a storm comes, the marsh takes the first bite, spreads the force, and returns the water a little poorer in anger. This is measured. Marshes reduce wave energy. They build elevation when healthy. Where they are allowed to grow, towns sit safer. At the far edge of the marsh, we reach a small museum kept by people who do not hurry. Inside, a single room holds maps that show the coastline breathing in and out over centuries. There is a chart that overlays tree ring storm years with washover layers from marsh cores. Another line shows years when dunes marched faster than a person could walk in a morning. The curator explains that dune speed rises after vegetation is damaged by salt and trampled by fear. After a large storm, the coast is a little raw. Wind has more sand to carry and fewer roots to say no. Recovery takes seasons. Sometimes a single dry year arrives after the storm and slows the healing. The entire story rests on measurements, no drama, only cause and effect. We step outside again. The day has warmed. A breeze sets the dune grass singing in a sound like 1,000 tiny brushes on silk. At the beach, the lifeguard stands are empty because the season is not yet bold. We meet a fisherman mending a net. He says the fish will come with the first stretch of fog. The fog arrives when the wind is right to draw surface water off the coast, letting cooler water rise with its freight of nutrients. His words match satellite records along many western coasts on our present Earth. Upwelling feeds life. The lives that depend on it learn the wind by heart. A line of children passes with woven baskets and small shovels. They stop at a fenced area where young dune grass has been planted in rows. The teacher shows them how to tuck sand around the roots and how to place brush in zigzags that invite drifts to build without burying the plants. Each stake carries a ribbon with a month and a name. The children laugh at the way the sand squeaks under their shoes. This is not decoration. It is long work to keep a line of dunes alive. Healthy dunes help towns breathe in storms. The proof sits everywhere that dunes were cut and the sea reached streets that thought it never would. By mid-afternoon, we walk to an overlook where the old ridge meets a headland of stubborn rock. From here, the coast curves out of sight in both directions. The headland throws a wind shadow that lets sand settle and build wider beaches on one side than the other. This is a local example of a larger rule. Coasts that are not straight teach sand to sort itself by grain size. Shape bars and troughs. Feed spits that grow like slow fingers. On a continent with long reaches of similar orientation, these patterns would repeat for great distances, letting people learn one place and apply the lesson elsewhere with very few surprises. Clouds gather where the horizon fades into sky. Not a wall, but a patient assembly. The barometer in your bones says the weather is planning something. We meet a ranger who carries an instrument that measures wind and a notebook that carries dates. She points to a wooden post with numbers running up its side. She says that during the last major storm the water rose to the second line from the top, while the dunes held. The marsh behind the ridge took the weight and returned it in a slower breath. She taps the post. She says it is not a warning. It is a memory made visible. Memory reduces fear because it gives shape to what might come. Evening comes on with the color of tea. We return to the pine grove for one more lesson. The researcher lays the cores side by side on a table and matches thin years and thick. A pattern emerges. Every so often a cluster of narrow rings lines up across many trees. The clusters are separated by long runs of average years. She explains that storminess along this coast waxes and wanes in pulses that likely follow slow shifts in ocean heat and long wind patterns. She uses careful words, records show, evidence suggests, model support. She says the lesson is not fate, it is rhythm. People can work with rhythm. We light a small lantern and walk the boardwalk back across the marsh. Fireflies meet us halfway and trade tiny signals with one another over the still water. Out on the open shore the waves keep their old count, one and another and another. At our feet the sand keeps sliding down the tiny slip faces that formed this morning. A night breeze flows from land to sea. The air is soft and easy to breathe. We sit where the dune foot meets the flat, and we listen for a while as the coast resets its lines one grain at a time. We promised precision, and we keep it now. Trees store storm years as narrow rings when salt and wind stress them across a wide area. Dunes migrate by grains that hop and roll under steady wind, and are slowed by plants and brush. Marshes reduce wave energy and build ground when they are healthy. Washover layers in marsh cores mark past extreme events that matched records where people kept dates. These are the bones under our calm walk. Upon them we placed a gentle fabric of daily life, a child planting dune grass, a ranger reading a post that is really a memory, a fisherman who knows the first fog by feel. If this chapter felt steady underfoot and soft underhand, tell me which path you would choose next. The high cold lakes that trace old tears in the crust, or the caravan road that threads the dry interior from well to well under a sky filled with patient stars. Your vote becomes our next quiet line on the map. Let night finish drawing its simple line across the sea. The dunes breathe in and out with the wind. Pines make their low silver sound. Somewhere a door closes softly and lamplight rests in a window like a small moon. The road is long, the world is kind. Sleep well. Dawn arrives over high country with a hush. The air is cool and thin, carrying the faint smell of stone and lichen. Before you lies a chain of lakes, each long and narrow, like mirrors dropped into a crack. Their waters catch the first light and stretch it into silver ribbons. We are continuing our calm thought experiment, walking through the science of rifting, crustal stretching, and the ecology that grows where land almost tears but does not. If this quiet journey helps you rest, subscribe now and share in the comments what you would choose to explore first in a Rift Valley world. The high cold lakes with their deep clear waters, the hot springs that steam on the slopes, or the towns that rest where caravan paths cross the water. Your answer helps set our next branch. The ground under your feet slopes gently, then drops in a sharp step. This is a fault escarpment, a place where the crust stretched and one block slid down relative to its neighbor. Evidence from our Earth shows such structures along the Great Rift in Africa, in the basin and range of North America, and in many ancient valleys now filled with sediments. The mechanism is simple. Heat within the mantle drives slow convection. The crust above stretches and breaks. Blocks tilt. Valleys open. Lakes fill the low spaces. The difference in our thought experiment is scale and persistence. In a world where the single continent never broke apart fully, these valleys would be more common. Running like seams across the body of the land, we walk down to the shore of the first lake. The water is cool enough to numb the hand in a minute. Its clarity tells you it is young in geologic time. Little sediment has yet filled it. The bottom drops away quickly, as soundings would show with a weighted line. Scientists infer depths of over 1,000 meters in some of our present rift lakes such as Tanganyika and Baikal. In our imagined chain the numbers may differ, but the principle remains. Stretch the crust and you make long narrow basins. Water finds them and stays. The wind brushes the surface into scales of light. At the margin, reeds stand in belts that ring with insects. A grape dives and surfaces with a silver fish. Evidence from modern high lakes shows that biodiversity often flourishes here. Endemic species evolve in isolation, small cichlids in Africa, ancient sponges in Baikal. Our imagined lakes would write the same story. Many lineages adapting to narrow waters, each valley a world of its own. We follow a track along the shore. The soil is rich with minerals brought up by faults in hot water. A spring steams nearby. Its rim is coated with travertine, a stone made from dissolved calcium carbonate that falls out of solution when the water cools. You can see the fine banding, each layer a memory of flow. These deposits are studied by geologists to reconstruct past water chemistry and climate. In our story, people would use the warm basins for bathing, for healing, for simple comfort. That is imagination laid on stone that is real. Past the spring, the valley widens and holds a settlement. Houses sit on terraces cut into the slope. Roofs shine with morning dew. Smoke rises straight, meaning the air is still and stable. The town depends on three gifts: fertile soil in the fans where small rivers meet the lake, fish from the deep waters, and routes that connect caravans across the rift. A trader shows us salt blocks from the coast, obsidian blades chipped from a flow-up valley, and jars of dried fish packed in woven reeds. The goods are not fantasy. Rift valleys in our present Earth have served as corridors for trade for tens of thousands of years, connecting highland to lowland, interior to coast. We leave the town and climb a spur. From above, the view stretches. Lakes lie like beads on a string. The faults that bound them are sharp lines against the horizon. Geologists call these half-grabens, tilted blocks where one side drops and the other lifts. Satellite images show them clearly in places like East Africa. If we stood here with such a tool, we would see the same. The world is kind enough to repeat its geometry. Clouds gather and cast moving shadows. They slide over the lakes, leaving patches of bright steel among gray pools. Weather here can be dramatic. Warm air rising from the basin meets cool air flowing down from surrounding uplands. The collision builds storms. Models suggest that rift valleys often make their own microclimates, with higher rainfall along steep escarpments and drier zones in the basin interiors. In our walk, this explains why forests cling to the upper slopes, while savannas stretch along the valley floor. We descend again and rest near a delta where a river meets the lake. The water slows, drops its load of silt, and spreads into a fan of channels that shift with every flood. Farmers have laid low walls to guide the flow, to spread the silt where they wish. This is measured practice. Deltas are fertile, but they move. Learning where to plant and where to step back is a lesson that repeats with every generation. Evidence for such adaptation rests in abandoned fields, now buried under new deposits, and in oral histories that speak of land gained and lost with the water. At nightfall, we camp on a terrace above the lake. The air cools quickly. The stars arrive like a river of fire. Their reflection lies broken on the small waves below. Insects pulse in chorus. A night bird calls with a low note that seems to belong to the stone as much as to the air. Fire warms your hands, and the scent of juniper drifts down from the slope. You close your eyes. The science that underlies the day holds steady. Crust stretches, blocks tilt, lakes fill, species adapt. The story that carries you into sleep is gentler. A silver surface, a warm spring, a town that leans on trade and patience. We keep our promise to end with clear bones. Rift valleys form when crust stretches and breaks into blocks. Lakes fill the low places. They are often deep, narrow, and geologically young. They create microclimates with wetter uplands and drier floors. They support unique life because isolation fosters specialization. They invite people to settle because soils are fertile, waters are rich, and corridors connect. Upon these bones we place soft steps. A trader's goods, a spring's comfort, a night fire by the shore. If this chapter steadied you, share in the comments which road to follow next. The dry interior where caravans walk under a sky full of stars. The high plateau where glaciers write their lines, or the long coast where fog and tide hold equal power. Your choice becomes our next quiet map. Let the last sparks die down. The lake keeps its mirror. The valley holds its breath. Somewhere a ripple carries silver light across the water. The night is kind, sleep well. Night lets go of the horizon and a pale band of light begins to rise behind low hills. We stand at the edge of the dry interior where roads turn to tracks and tracks turn to memory. A caravan waits in a cup of land sheltered from the wind. The air is cool, smelling of dust and fennel from last night's stew. Bells on the animals make a sound like patient water. We are continuing our same calm thought experiment while keeping our feet on firm ground with what geographers know about deserts, what hydrologists know about oozes, and what traders have learned from long crossings on many continents. If these unhurried journeys help you rest and learn, subscribe now and write a quiet line in the comments. Would you choose the starlit march across open gravel, the noon halt in the thin shade of a rock, or the evening arrival at a courtyard where a well lifts cold water by rope and hand? Your answer helps choose our next branch with care. The guide lifts a hand and we begin. The ground underfoot is not soft dune sand. It is a desert pavement, a mosaic of stones varnished by wind and time until they shine like old coins. This surface forms when wind removes the fine material and leaves a protective armor. Evidence from our world shows pavements can be very old, with stones set and reset by rare floods and daily thermal cycles that crack rock like slow percussion. Pavements matter. They shed water toward shallow channels, and they hold tracks for weeks after a crossing when no wind arrives to calm them away. The sky grows brighter and the air warms. In deserts, the difference between night and day can be large, because bare ground stores heat quickly and releases it quickly. Scientists measure this as a high daily temperature range. The physics is simple. Dry air and sparse vegetation mean little water to evaporate. Without that evaporative cooling, midday heat rises. At night, with few clouds to trap infrared radiation, the land gives its warmth straight to the sky. You can feel this in your lungs, cool and thin at dawn, warm and dry by mid-morning. We reach the first wadi, a broad, shallow channel cut by water that visits only a few days each year. The sand is firm here, sorted by last season's flow. On the banks grow tamarisk and acacia. Their roots reach down to moisture that lingers beneath the bed. A small lizard runs ahead and stops, tail lifted like a thin pennant. Wadis are the memory of rain. They move water, seed, and fine soil from high ground to low. People learn to camp near them but not in them. They learn to read the sky upstream because the danger of flood comes not from what you see above you, but from what you cannot see beyond the hills. By mid-morning the light becomes white and sure. Heat ripples above the ground and makes distant shapes soften and lift. This is a mirage, not pooled water. A layer of hot air near the surface bends light upward and carries to your eye an inverted image of the bright sky. The mind reads that bent light as shining water. The effect is predictable, repeatable, and measured on many flat hot surfaces from salt pans to asphalt. Knowing this saves steps and tempers hope. Both are useful. The caravan halts at a low tongue of rock that throws a thin shade. Animals kneel. Loads creak. A skin of water passes hand to hand. The guide pours a capful on the ground and watches how quickly it vanishes. This small test reads the soil's thirst. On coarse sand the drop disappears in a blink. On hard crust it sits and shines. The reading tells whether the next hour needs ration or ease. Hydrology lives in gestures like this as much as in instruments. The desert rewards attention and punishes hurry. We leave the pavement and climb a low ridge of sand that runs with the wind like a sleeping cat. Its crest is sharp. The slip face on the lee side shows thin tongues where small avalanches fell this morning when the breeze freshened. Sand moves by saltation, hops pushed by wind, and by creep, slow rolling of larger grains. Where the supply is large and wind direction steady, dunes grow into long lines called seefs that can run for tens of miles. Where the wind veers with the seasons, stars and domes form with many arms. Evidence for these forms spreads across every arid belt on our present Earth. In our single continent interior, the same forms would repeat across very wide reaches, carving maps of wind on the ground. From the crest we see a pale smear on the horizon that is not cloud. It is dust. For a while the air tastes like clay. Dust rises when dry soil is offered to strong wind. It can travel for thousands of miles above our present oceans and feed forests when it falls. On this world the roads would change with the shape of the land, but the function would remain. Dust carries iron and phosphorus, makes sunsets wind dark, and cools or warms the air depending on the height and the color of the grains. Scientists test these effects with balloon satellites and long records cut from ice and peat. Our quiet walk carries those findings like stones in a pocket. We descend into a basin of gravel and scattered shrubs. A humming begins that you feel more than hear. It is wind working in a far channel. The animals lift their heads. The guide changes course a little to keep the wind on our quarter. Sand stings the back of your hand like quick rain. The choice matters. Wind that meets you head-on steals water from your mouth and eyes. Wind from behind fills your footprints and writes confusion for anyone who must follow. Crosswinds move the load and unsettle legs. You learn to angle, to balance, to listen to the note of the day. Just past noon we reach an oasis. The air changes first, then the color, then the sound. Wind lowers its voice and the shade breathes. A clump of date palms throws a net of shadow over a pool no deeper than a tall person. The pool tastes faintly of stone and of a sweetness left by leaves. Oozes exist because water under pressure rises along faults or through cracks in hard beds, often where a wadi floor cuts down to meet the invisible river. In some regions, people tap fossil water laid down centuries ago when the air was kinder. In others, they use canats, gently sloped tunnels that borrow a small measure of groundwater and deliver it by gravity to fields and courtyards. These systems are measured, mapped, and centuries old in our world. The same logics would hold under a wider sky. A keeper meets us and leads the animals to a long trough made of lime plaster that gleams like bone. He dips a cup and hands it to each traveler in turn. There is a rule here: water for mouths before water for feet. He explains that the palm grove is tended by families who share rights according to a calendar that turns on the height of the water in the well. The measure is a staff with marks burned into it. When the water rests at a certain mark, one set of fields is fed. When it falls to the next, another set rests and cleans. The schedule repeats with the season and the sky. This is governance built on a column of water. It has a softness because the post leaves no room for argument. It only records. We sleep in a square room around a well court. The lime walls keep heat out and a little cool in. The ceiling holds reeds bound with cord. Stars look down through a vent and seem to pause there like guests at the door. After dark, a book opens on a low table. Lines show angles between stars, a rope length for each. These are not decorations. They are routes. The caravan follows star pairs that hold steady across the season and checks bearings by the rising and setting points of bright ones. In the north, one star hardly moves. Near the equator, that trick shifts. So travelers learn to rely on the tilt of the band of our galaxy and the hour angle of planets that keep honest time. Navigation is not magic, it is patient practice. Before dawn we start again. The air smells of ash and cardamom. Feet find the rhythm that can last a day. Step, sway, breathe, step, breathe. The mind loosens the need to count and begins to notice small things. The light under a cloud edge, the way a beetle writes in soft dust, the way a distant hill moves against the sky when the heat shivers. This is the desert teaching, not the lesson of thirst or danger, but the lesson of scale. That small and steady will take you across a map that frightens the hurried. We cross a field where stones stand like books leaning on one another. Each has a varnish, a thin dark coat laid down by time and trace metals. When you move one, the underside is pale. In some places, people have set such stones upright in long lines to mark safe paths that climb out of flood channels. The lines also gather stories. Here a traveler left a chin coin for the next person to find. Here someone scratched a picture of an ibex with curved horns. Rock art across our world marks water, roads, and memory. In this place, the same need writes the same language with the same tools. Afternoon brings a sky boiled thin by heat. A single cloud grows over a distant hill, climbs, and surprises itself into a short rain. We watch the shadow move across the gravel. We smell the first drops on dust, a scent old as the planet. After the rain passes, the ground drinks and closes its mouth again. On a slope nearby, we can see small fan lines drawn by the downpour, each one a map from rock to root. These pulses carry seeds, lift salts, and cool soil crusts. They are small in area, large in effect. The desert is a place where the few hours that welcome water become the core of the year. In the late day, we join a road that shows wheel marks and camel marks welded together by time. The track leads to a caravanserai that sits where three routes meet and a low spring keeps a promise. The gate is thick, the courtyard is wide. Rooms open onto the square like mouths around a bowl. The keeper keeps a slate. Entries show who came, from where, and with what loads. Salt and bricks, copper in baskets, skins filled with oil and date syrup. In a one-continent world, such houses of the road would stitch regions together in a dense fabric. Trade would feel like a season more than a risk. Prices would be set by rain and roads rather than by shipwreck and wind. Night falls and music begins. Not loud. A stringed instrument sits exactly where a tired chest likes to rest. A hand drum keeps time like a walking heart. Stories gather and spill. Some are practical, where to dig a shallow well in a certain basin, where to find a tree whose inner bark cures a problem no one wishes to name. Some are comfort. A lion that learned to drink by looking at the moon. A wen that once carried a caravan back to its starting place when the guide had died. Story keeps the mind from clutching fear, and it carries small packets of instruction inside scenes the body remembers. We close the day with clear bones. Deserts swing widely between day and night, because dry air and bare ground do not store or evaporate water enough to smooth the curve. Desert pavements form by wind removing flines and by rare floods and daily thermal stress rearranging stones into an armor. Dunes move by hopping and rolling grains, organized by wind direction and supply. Oozes exist where groundwater meets the surface along faults, or where ancient water can be tapped and guided by gentle slopes. Caravans travel at dawn and dusk to spare water and use stars, because sky offers the only reliable straight lines. On those bones we set our quiet walk, a guide testing soil with a cap of water, a keeper reading a post that is a shared law, a courtyard that turns routes into a family for a night. If this chapter felt steady underfoot and soft underhand, tell me which road you want next. A climb to the high plateau where glaciers write with blue knives, a return to the long coast where fog sets the calendar, or a walk across ancient basalt where the planet speaks in hexagons. Your vote becomes our next quiet line on the map. Let the lanterns gutter one by one. The courtyard cools like a bowl set in snow. Out beyond the wall the wind calms the gravel into low shining waves. Bells answer one another across the dark. The night is kind. Sleep well. Morning light breaks across the edge of a high plateau. The air is thin and cool, carrying the smell of stone dust and resin from low shrubs. The land spreads like a table raised by patient hands of tectonics. In our calm thought experiment, this is one of many broad highlands that a single continent would grow where plates meet and lift, but do not split. We keep our feet steady on what geologists measure: uplift from collisions, wide valleys filled with till, glaciers that carve clean lines into stone. If these gentle journeys help you rest and learn, subscribe now and share in the comments what part of the high country you would choose to wander first. The blue knives of the glaciers, the open sky of the plateau grasslands, or the cold rivers that carry light down to lower valleys. Your answer helps choose our next branch with care. We begin at the toe of a glacier that lies like a sleeping animal across the valley floor. Its surface is a quilt of white and gray. Crevasses open where the ice bends. The sound is faint, cracks and pops like old wood in winter. This is not imagination. Glaciers move under their own weight. Evidence shows that ice at the base melts and refreezes, letting the mass slide slowly, a few tens of meters a year in many cases. Faster when meltwater lubricates the bed. This motion leaves marks: U-shaped valleys, polished rock, moraines piled at the edge. Our eyes read the same marks here. Our calm thought experiment builds details around them: the gleam of meltwater pools, the scent of wet mineral air. Climb with me onto the lateral moraine. From here the ice looks endless, though we know it is measured in kilometers, not infinities. Scientists bore into such ice to extract cores that hold trapped bubbles of air. Those bubbles record the atmosphere as it was thousands of years ago. Carbon dioxide, methane, ash from far eruptions. In our world, these records show glacial and interglacial swings. In our single continent scenario, the records would still exist, though the timing and spread of ice would differ depending on ocean currents and mountain ranges. The bones remain. The muscles change. We step beyond the ice onto a broad plateau. The ground is a patchwork of hardy grasses, alpine flowers no larger than a coin, and lichen that writes orange and gray maps across the stone. The air feels thin. Each breath carries less oxygen. Science explains this clearly. Atmospheric pressure falls with altitude because there is less weight of air above. At 3,000 meters, a lung must work harder. At 5,000 meters, it learns new rhythms. Hemoglobin in the blood binds oxygen differently over days. Evidence shows entire cultures have adapted to such heights, with deeper chests, more red cells, and traditions that fold work into the pulse of the day. The plateau stretches farther than the eye can hold. It is not empty. Yak-like animals graze in small bands, their coats thick and oily against the wind. Pikas dart between rocks, shrilling when shadows cross overhead. Above us, a lammergeier rides thermals, drops a bone, and lets it shatter to reach the marrow. Each life here is tuned to thin air, short summers, and long sun. We follow a trail of cairns that guide across the open highland. Travelers place one stone upon another to mark safe routes where storms can erase footprints in a moment. Evidence for such markers exists across our own plateaus. From the Andes to Tibet, the science of wind at altitude is simple. Less friction means faster speeds. A storm here can arrive like a slammed door. The cairns are the map, the habit is survival. By midday the sun is strong, the air is dry, and the ground warms quickly. Yet a few meters below the surface permafrost holds. Frozen ground that thaws only in summer's top layer. This active layer hosts tough sedges and herbs. Their roots knit soil that might otherwise blow away in the fierce plateau winds. Permafrost is measured with thermistors in boreholes. It records climate shifts over decades and centuries. If a continent stayed gathered and raised wide plateaus, permafrost belts would expand and contract with glacial cycles, a memory written in ice and stone. We reach a river that has just left a glacier. It is cold enough to sting the fingers, white with silt called rock flour, ground fine by the ice and kept aloft by turbulence. Sunlight strikes the suspended particles and makes the water look milky blue. Scientists use this as a marker of active glaciation. Satellite sensors can trace rock flour plumes where rivers meet lakes. Our thought experiment keeps the principle. The river speaks in the same tongue of grit and light. A village sits where the river widens into a braided plain. Houses are low and tight, built of stone with roofs that slope gently to shed snow. Prayer flags or cloth strips tied to poles flutter in the wind. Not decoration but wish. Villagers farm barley in terraces cut into slopes where irrigation channels bring meltwater. Evidence from highland societies in our world shows barley, potatoes, and hardy greens thrive at elevations where other crops fail. The rhythm of sowing and reaping follows the melt. The calendar hangs on ice. We are invited to share butter tea that smells of salt and warmth. The fat in the tea carries heat into the body. The salt replaces what sweat and breath steal in the thin air. Every practice here is practical first, comforting second. When the wind roars over the plateau at night and doors rattle, the tea in the veins and the stone in the walls make survival a little easier. This is ethnography as much as imagination. High life is careful life. Afternoon clouds gather with speed. The sky darkens at the edges. Lightning forks to distant ridges. Sound rolls across the open like a slow drum. Plateau storms can arrive without warning. Scientists explain the mechanism. Sun warms ground. Air rises quickly. Pressure falls. Condensation builds. In the thin air, storms form sharp and fast. You learn to watch cloud bases, to smell ozone, to feel static on the skin. The villagers have stories. A goat that sensed a storm before the first thunder. A child who braided a rope of grass that sparked blue when lifted in the wind. Story and science walk side by side. Evening clears the air again. The plateau breathes out its heat. Cold arrives like a tide. Stars spill in numbers that feel impossible. The band of the galaxy arches with a weight that seems to press the land lower. At such altitude, the sky is fierce and clear. Telescopes placed on plateaus record stars with less distortion. Eyes placed here see farther. People build myths and maps at the same time. We sleep in a stone house that hums with wind against the walls. The hearth glows. Sparks dance upward and vanish into the draft. You lie under thick wool. The pulse slows. The body learns the plateau's lesson. Breathe steady. Move slow. Respect the sky. We close with clear bones. Glaciers form in valleys where snow persists. They flow and carve U-shapes, leave moraines. Polished stone. Plateau climates swing between fierce sun and bitter night because of thin air and little moisture. Permafrost records climate in frozen ground. Rivers from ice carry rock flour that colors water. High cultures adapt with terrace farming. Thick walls and food that answers cold and altitude. Upon these bones we placed our walk, a cairn, a village, a cup of butter tea, a night under stars that feel close enough to ring. If this chapter steadied you, share in the comments what path we should take next. The long basalt fields where cooled lava draws hexagons. The fog-bound coasts where tide and air braid. Or the grass seas of the interior where herds move like weather. Your vote becomes our next quiet map. Let night finish its work. The wind lowers. The river under the house whispers against its stones. A dog shifts in sleep. A lamp goes out. The world turns. The night is kind. Sleep well. Dawn opens over a dark plain that looks like frozen water in motion. Low swells of stone run to every horizon. Between the swells sit shallow hollows where rain gathers into clear pans that mirror the sky. We are walking the basalt fields. A country poured by long ago fire and cooled into music the eye can hear. Our calm thought experiment continues. But our feet stay on firm ground with what geologists measure about lava flows, hexagon columns, and soils that grow from black rock. If these quiet journeys help you rest and learn, subscribe now and tell me in the comments what you would touch first here. The ropey skin of a smooth flow, the broken crunch of a clinker field, or the cool shadow under a natural bridge that once carried fire. Your answer helps choose our next branch with care. We begin on a tongue of stone that looks like coiled ropes pressed together. The Hawaiians gave this surface a name that scientists still use: pahoeho. It forms when lava moves slowly and keeps a warm skin that wrinkles as the liquid beneath slides forward. A few valleys away the surface turns to a broken cinder of knives and loose plates. That is a surface made when lava loses gas and speed and tumbles forward as a rough front. Evidence from our world shows both forms in the same fields, where the slope and the heat change over short distances. Our eyes read the same changes here. Our story adds the soft scrape of a boot and the dry chime of glassy shards underfoot. Follow the flow front where a low cliff exposes the heart of the field. Here the rock is split into tall straight prisms that fit together like a solved puzzle. Most have 6 sides. Some have 5. A few have 4 or 7. This is columnar jointing, a structure that forms when hot rock cools and contracts. Cracks begin at a cooling surface and grow inward as a honeycomb. 6-sided cells are common because they fill space evenly with the least strain. Scientists infer joint spacing from cooling rate. Wide columns where cooling was slow, narrow where cooling was fast. You can see the rule in a roadside cut, where small columns sit above large ones like stacked organs in a stone cathedral. We walk down a talus of fallen blocks to the base of a waterfall where a river drops over a rim of columns. Mist braids the air. The pool smells faintly of iron and rain. In our world there are places like this. Giant's Causeway beside a cold sea, a post pile set like organ pipes above a high meadow. Under a single continent, the same physics would write the same shapes wherever large sheets of basalt cooled slowly and evenly. The music is not a metaphor only. Strike a long column with a small stone and it sings a quick bell note. Climb a slope of cinders to a low cone. The ground crunches like old bread. Each pebble is a bubble that froze before it could pop. These scoria cones build around vents during short bursts when gas-rich lava sprays into the air and rains down as glassy fragments. In quiet seasons the cone sleeps and wears a thin coat of hardy plants. In busy seasons it spits again, laying a fresh ring of red and black. The cone we stand on opens to the west, not by chance. Prevailing wind leaned the falling cinders, and the crater learned the wind as it grew. Evidence of this wind teaching sits in hundreds of cones across our present continents. A dark door opens in the side of the cone. We duck into a tube where a river of fire once ran. The roof formed when the top of the lava cooled and crusted while the hot core kept moving. When the last of the liquid drained, a tunnel remained. The air inside is cool and still. The walls carry ropey textures where drips froze in motion. In some worlds like ours, such tubes run for many kilometers. In our imagined wide fields, they may run farther because the terrain slopes gently for a long reach. People use them as cellars, as cool corridors to walk when midday heat turns the plain to a griddle. as safe paths in dust storms when wind writes knives in the air. We step back into morning and follow a faint track toward a town that rests, where black rock weathers into brown soil. Basalt is a mafic rock rich in iron and magnesium. When rain and time work it into clay, the result can be very fertile. Many of the world's famous agricultural belts sit on old lava. Evidence shows that calcium and iron from basalt feed grasses and grains well when drainage is right. In our single continent, this will be true where thin flows and ash fall broke into small fragments early. Thick sheets on high dry ground will stay bare longer. The rule is simple. Fracture opens a door for water and roots. Solid glass keeps it shut. The town uses the stone the way a river town uses water. Blocks from column falls pave the streets. Fit them tight and they stay without mortar. Slabs roof sheds where grain rests in cool shade. Terrace walls climb the low hills in neat lines that turn slope into steps. In a small square, a mason shapes a hexagonal block by tapping off corners already suggested by the stone. Nothing is wasted. The broken faces become cobbles. The dust becomes grit to temper clay. A child plays at the edge with a bag of small columns that look like crayons, building and rebuilding a tiny ring of standing stones. By midday, heat presses low and even. We sit under a natural bridge where a tube roof has held while both sides fell away. The shade breathes. A swallow flicks once through the arch and is gone. Talk becomes the kind that keeps energy low. A farmer explains that the field beyond the bridge grows barley and vines because the soil there holds water in a slow, honest way. He points toward a bare flow farther out that sheds rain like a roof. The town will not plant there until someone with patient hands has broken the crust into interlocking fragments that invite roots. He smiles. He says the basalt is the teacher. It wants you to earn its harvest. Afternoon clouds lift from a far escarpment. The line of stone was once the chilled edge of a flow hundreds of meters thick. The world has since weathered and washed the plain lower by that much, leaving the edge proud like a great page in a book. In our earth there are provinces where such pages stack for many levels. Deccan in the south of Asia, Columbia River in the west of North America, Siberia in the far north. Evidence indicates that some of these pulses of flood basalt were tied to deep plumes and to rifting. Some lined up with times of stress for life when gases warmed or choked the air. In our calm thought experiment we walk without alarm and say only this: the planet writes in layers. Fire is one of its pens. We skirt a shallow lake that sits in a basin made where a flow lobed around a hill and left a pocket. Dragonflies stitch the air. The water is tea-colored from plants. At the margin we find round stones with pitted faces, like loaves baked too hot and popped open. These are volcanic bombs from a cinder fountain long gone. They tell us the wind and the angle and the heat in their shapes. A geologist reads them like a diary. A child pockets one because it feels good in the hand. Toward evening a cool draft draws down the long tubes and across the plain. Heat leaves the stone with a small sigh. Basalt is dark and it drinks sunlight greedily. It also yields it back when the sun goes. Nights here can be gentle even after a fierce noon. You learn to work early and late, to rest when the air has the color of brass, to listen for the day when thin clouds soften the sky and allow long work without cost. We end the walk at a low bluff where a wall of hexagons faces the west. Light slides across the facets and turns them to honey, then amber, then the brown of warm bread. In the hush you can hear small sounds that feel like memory. A grain letting go and ticking down a crack, a wing touching a ledge and lifting, a clink as a mason sets the last stone in a terrace and steps back to see if the line is true. We keep our promise to be precise. Basalt forms when runny lava rich in iron and magnesium cools. Smooth, ropey surfaces grow where flow is slow and skins stay warm. Broken clinker fields grow where gas escapes and the front tumbles. Columns with many sides form as hot rock contracts during cooling, with 6 sides common because they pack a plane well. Lava tubes roof over when the surface chills while the core keeps moving. Basalt weathers into fertile soils where water can enter and linger. Flood basalt provinces can stack many layers and have sometimes altered air and oceans when gases rose in great volume. Those are the bones. Upon them we placed our soft walk, a town that learns stone like a language, a field that asks for patient hands, and an evening where light turns rock to bread and back again. If this chapter felt steady underfoot and soft underhand, tell me which road we should take next. The fog-bound coast where tide and wind write calendars, the grass seas of the interior where hooves move like weather, or the deep caves under this basalt where darkness keeps a slow continent of its own. Your vote becomes our next quiet line on the map. Let the last light lower, the columns cool and keep their music to themselves. A bat writes its brief script against the sky. Far off a bell marks an hour that belongs to no one. The plain breathes, the night is kind. Sleep well. Dawn spreads like a quiet sheet across the interior. The land ahead is a soft rise and fall of grass that goes on until the eye forgets how to stop. The air smells of sun-warmed stalks and dust that is not yet awake. A lark climbs on a thread of song and hangs there as if tied to the sky. We are walking the grass seas, a world built by roots and wind and hooves. Our calm thought experiment continues while our feet stay on firm ground with what ecologists measure about prairies, steppes, savannas, and the long conversations between fire, rain, and grazing. If these gentle journeys help you rest and learn, subscribe now and tell me in the comments what you would follow first here. The slow river hidden under grass, the herd that moves like weather, or the far storm that walks on black feet. Your answer helps choose our next branch with care. Begin with the soil beneath your boots. When you press the toe in and lift, dark crumbs fall like cake. This is a mollisol, a fertile grassland soil built by roots that grow deep and feed the ground in place. Evidence from our world shows that grasslands create some of the richest topsoils on Earth because most of their body lives below the surface, where decay is slow and steady. Worms and beetles and fungi do the rest. In climates with strong seasons, the result is a deep black layer that holds water like a good sponge and gives it back without complaint. Walk into the wind and listen. A low hiss moves across the stems, then a shiver, then a hush. The sound travels in waves. You can measure the wind by how long it takes that ripple to reach you from the next rise. The grasses are not all the same. Some grow in clumps like baskets. Some spread like a soft mat. Warm season grasses wake when the sun climbs high. Cool season grasses rise earlier. Root depths differ. Some dive many hand lengths, anchoring soil against flood and drought. Others sit shallower and fill gaps when fire has cleaned the ground. This mosaic is not decoration. It is resilience. Evidence shows that grasslands are shaped by a triangle of forces. Climate that sets the length of the growing season, fire that clears old stems and returns minerals to the surface, and grazing that clips growth without killing crowns. The triangle holds across continents. In wetter belts, trees test the edge. In drier belts, shrubs test from the other side. Fire and hooves hold the middle open. When lightning runs on a hot wind, fine fuels carry a fast flame that stays close to the ground. After rain, the ash feeds new shoots, and the grazers follow their green ribbon across the map. On the next rise, a herd moves like a low cloud. Backs sway. Tails brush flies. Calves pivot and run and return in arcs that draw smiles without asking. Hooves drum the soil, not hard, but in a way that you feel in the rib. Evidence from our world shows that moving herds punch shallow cups into the ground that hold rain, press seeds into contact with soil, and break capped crusts so water can enter. A herd that wanders and rests in turns can increase the land's thirst for good water. A herd that lingers too long wounds it. People who live with grass learn to read that line as carefully as a sailor reads a shoal. We pause where the grass gives way to a ribbon of willows. A river is hiding there, narrow, clear, and full of fish that flash like coins under glass. The banks are undercut in places where ice and flood have worried them. Swallows have stitched nests in the clay. The river does not shout. It carries cool from a far ridge and the taste of limestone from a fault 2 valleys away. On a single continent with wide interiors, such rivers would thread the grass seas like long nerves. Most would be snow-fed in spring and shrink to strings of pools by late summer. Towns would bloom where the line crosses easy fords or where a spring adds certainty to a thirsty season. Predators keep their distance and keep pace with the herd. A pair of long-bodied cats ghost the shadow of a swale. On the blue shoulder of the morning, a flock of vultures tilts and watches. Evidence shows that predator and prey move in matched patterns that organize over years. Wolves alter where elk choose to feed. Cats push antelope to open ground. Carcasses feed beetles and birds and root fungi with a quiet generosity. This is not drama first. It is accounting. Energy passes from grass to muscle to scavenger to soil and returns as the next green. By midday the light turns white and the air feels folded. Heat shimmer lifts the horizon and makes distant cottonwoods look like boats. A wind shift brings the scent of smoke, thin and sweet, not urgent. Over the next rise a black line runs low and quick with flakes of flame that bounce and vanish. This is a cool fire set by people who have learned the old calendar. They light when grasses are dry enough to carry the flame and winds are steady but not harsh. They walk with brooms of soaked fiber and small shovels. They are not burning to destroy. They are asking the land a favor. Evidence from many prairies and savannas shows that such careful burning keeps shrubs from closing the sky and renews flowering plants that pollinators need. Weeks from now this patch will be a green flag that calls grazers from miles away, a moving feast that prevents overuse elsewhere. We meet a family camped near a shallow lake bright with white birds. Their tents are low and tight. The walls are woven reed and felt and tough cloth patched many times. They keep a ledger not on paper, but in what they notice: how far the herd moved between wells last year, how deep the snow sat in the cold month, which slope kept grass through the last late drought. These notes become decisions: the path this week, the rest next week, the place where the year's calves will stand when the first frost draws milk into butter. Afternoon falls and a storm builds out of the west. An anvil cloud grows as if someone is lifting a lid. The light under the belly of it turns the grass the color of pewter. Wind arrives as a long hand that presses the field flat and then lets it rise. You can smell metal. Then hail. Then rain so thick the world narrows to arm's length. Grasslands drink like they have been promised. The rivulets find old channels and run with brown haste. Thunder follows with a flat report. Records show that in interiors far from sea, storms can gather strength quickly when sun and uplift and the sharp line of a front work together. Lightning sets new fires in the distance while rain is still falling here. Tomorrow a black stitch will run across a green quilt. When the storm passes, the sky opens and the land steams. Meadowlarks climb and write new songs on the drying air. The herd spreads into the fresh shine. Heads drop, mouths work, tails swish. The ground gives easily. Hooves set shallow cups that will hold tonight's dew. Insects rise in short fountains and small birds hover and pluck them like sugar from tea. The world is busy without hurry. We climb a low came, a hill of old sand and gravel left when ice retreated long ago. From the crest the land looks like water again, waves that do not break. For that will never stop growing. Far to the south a darker line marks where rainfall is just a little greater, and scattered trees enter the story. To the north the hue pales where rain is just a little less and shrubs begin to test the rule. Scientists infer that in a single continent world, the belts would be wider and the edges more sensitive to changes in ocean heat and wind tracks. The center would feel the day and the night more than the coast does. The difference would not be exotic, only larger in scale. Evening brings long light that calms the tops of the stems into gold. A coyote calls, then another not close. The herd answers with a ripple of ears and a tightening that relaxes as quickly as it came. We reach a cluster of low buildings set into a fold of ground where a spring rises clear as glass. The walls are straw and clay. The roofs are seeded with short grass that keeps the rooms cool. Children roll a hoop in the yard and cheer when it jumps a stone. An elder oils a leather bag that will carry milk and wind into something that will keep for weeks. Nothing here is extra, and nothing is mean. The grass gives enough for patience and asks only the same in return. The night lowers like a shawl. The air cools and picks up a sweetness from crushed plants. Stars come out in such numbers that your breath forgets rhythm for a moment. Somewhere beyond the rise a drum begins. Not loud, a beat like a walking heart. The sound travels farther than it would in a forest. Across open ground sound does not tire early. People have learned to talk with that. A series of beats tells where a traveler is. A double beat offers help. Fire answers with a brief flare and a soft whistle. The night becomes a soft web instead of a wide emptiness. We keep our promise to be precise. Grassland soils grow dark and deep because roots feed carbon below ground where decay is steady. Fire resets stems and returns minerals while leaving crowns alive. Migrating herds that move and rest in balanced patterns can improve infiltration and seed contact, and when they linger too long they harm. Predators shape grazing patterns that in turn shape plants. Storms in interiors can strengthen quickly and carry hail and lightning when temperature contrasts are sharp. Upon those bones we placed our quiet walk, a herd-like weather, a cool fire walked by careful hands, a family ledger written in what they notice every day. If this chapter felt steady underfoot and soft underhand, tell me which path we should take next, the fog-bound coast where tide and wind write calendars, the deep caves under basalt where darkness keeps its own slow map, or the river cities that braid trade into the single continent like light into cloth. Your vote becomes our next quiet line on the map. Let the last light fold. Crickets begin their even count. Calves lie down and sigh. Far away lightning walks the horizon like an old friend with a lantern. The road continues. The night is kind. Sleep well. Here are the 3 most likely mistakes and how I will avoid them. 1. Blending speculation with facts. I will clearly mark calm thought experiment moments and keep the science grounded in speleology, lava tube formation, cave microclimate, and subterranean ecology. 2. Overstating certainty. I will use careful phrasing such as evidence shows, records suggest, and scientists infer when describing features that did not occur in this exact form. 3. Violating your script rules. I will not use the colon character. I will avoid all caps. And I will spell numbers as words. A dawn has not reached here for a very long time. We stand at the mouth of a dark slit in the basalt plain. Cold air flows out with a faint earthy smell like wet iron and dry leaf together. This is the door to a world that the sun only guesses at. Our calm thought experiment continues as we walk into the deep caves under the lava. We keep our steps on firm ground with what geologists and cave biologists measure about lava tubes. Skylights, airflow, minerals, and the quiet lives that do not need the day. If these unhurried journeys help you rest and learn, subscribe now and tell me in the comments which path you would follow first. The long gallery that once carried fire, the vertical pit that rings like a bell, or the low wet crawl where water writes crystals on black stone. Your choice helps us choose the next branch with care. We enter by a skylight where the tube roof fell long ago. The ring of the opening is glazed where rock once dripped and froze. The rubble at the bottom shows both smooth skins and rough clinker. Evidence from our world explains this clearly. Lava tubes form when a flow crusts at the surface, keeps liquid moving inside, then drains and leaves a tunnel. When the roof thins or shakes, a skylight opens, letting light and rain into the dark. The pile below records the fall. The intact walls record the flow. Ropey textures run along them, and small frozen drips hang like candles. Speleologists call those drips lavasicles. They are not the same as calcite stalactites in limestone caves. They are frozen fire. We move downslope. The floor is uneven but sound. Here and there the crust has collapsed into small pits that show a lower level. A faint breath of colder air rises from those mouths. Cave air is a slow creature. It moves because of differences in temperature and pressure between openings at different heights. In winter, cold air sinks in and the cave stores it. In summer, warm air rises out and draws cooler air from shaded slots. Evidence shows that even small drafts create steady microclimates. Temperatures down here change only a little through the year. Humidity is high. Sound carries strangely. Soft steps can travel far. Loud words die at short walls. A side passage narrows to a crawl and then opens into a high chamber. The ceiling is smooth and arched. The floor is a field of cracked plates that ring dull under your boots. This is a place where lava ponded, cooled from the top, and then drained through a low door, leaving the crust behind to settle on empty space. You can see lines on the walls where the level fell in steps. The lines are called flow ledges. The arithmetic of their spacing gives geologists the cooling rate and the viscosity of the melt. In our world, such readings are taken in tubes in Hawaii, Iceland, and young volcanic fields on many continents. On a single gathered continent, the same rules would hold wherever basalt sheets moved under a cooling roof. We switch lamps to a softer light to protect the life that prefers the dark. A spider with long legs stands perfectly still in a corner where the wall meets the floor. It hunts by touch, not by sight. A small beetle moves like a shadow across the rubble. Its body lacks pigment, and its eyes are small. Evidence from subterranean biology shows that many cave animals lose color and eyesight over long time and gain longer antennae, slower metabolism, and lifespans that fit a quiet world. What do they eat? In many lava tubes, the food web begins with wind-blown plant bits, fungal films, thin roots that find their way through cracks, and the rare gift of guano when bats choose a season here. We step into a section where the roof dips low and a faint trickle issues from a seam. The water tastes of stone and a slight bitterness from basalt weathering. Basalt does not dissolve like limestone, so it does not usually grow the familiar forests of calcite speleothems. Yet where rain passes through soil rich in carbon dioxide and finds a pinch of calcium in ash or dust, it can paint thin curtains and tiny stalactites. Elsewhere in tubes, vapor from warm air that meets cold rock can deposit crystals of gypsum and other salts as white frost. Evidence of these secondary minerals hangs in many lava caves in thin fringes that sparkle like frost under a lamp and melt back into invisibility when you look away. The passage bends and climbs toward a circular well. The walls are smooth and bare grooves that spiral upward. The sound you make here comes back as a single note with a long tail. This is a vertical vent called a hornado throat or a drainback shaft. It fed the tube when the flow was higher or allowed gases to escape as the crust thickened. The grooves are marks left by thin tongues of lava that spun as they fell. A gentle touch on the wall sets a faint chime among loose flakes. We speak softly, not from fear, but from respect for a place where echoes have time to age. Beyond the shaft the tube descends again. The air grows cooler and the walls sweat. Drops join and trace dark lines that wander down to the floor, where the floor holds small basins. Thin clear films quiver. We kneel and watch tiny shrimp-like animals move like punctuation marks. These are stygobionts, water dwellers that do not leave the dark. Evidence from our world shows that even new caves can host such life if groundwater connects them to older aquifers. The connection may be thin as a reed, yet it is enough to carry a population into a new address. Their bodies carry the same lessons as land cave dwellers: pale, slow, careful. We come upon a section of tube that has been blocked by a fall. On the far side a low breeze carries a scent of guano and a faint whisper like rain. We wait. Then a soft storm begins wings. A small colony of bats swirls in the chamber beyond and moves toward an evening that our clocks do not see from here. Everywhere on Earth bats gather in caves where air is steady and predators are few. They eat insects by the handful of an hour. They drop guano that feeds fungi, beetles, and microbial mats. Entire cave communities grow from these nightly commutes, under a single continent with wide basalt fields. Such colonies would be common where tubes intersect with canyons and give safe doors to the night. We backtrack and take a higher dry route that opens into an old skylight pit grown soft with time. Roots hang like curtains. Some are as thick as a wrist. Evidence shows that plants will reach down many meters to find water. The cave returns something to them in exchange, a steady reservoir of cool and humidity. Through these root curtains, sugars drip into the cave food web as invisible rain. Ants travel the ropes. Spiders harvest the traffic. A small gecko rests where the last light fades and the first dark begins. This rim is a border and a bridge. A cluster of thin white crystals glints on a ledge. The guide asks us to stand well back. He explains that the crystals are delicate evaporites that grow when damp air moves along a narrow path. A single touch can break a decade of patient work. Leave nothing but breath. He points to a low soot mark near the ceiling from a torch used by explorers long ago. The mark is a reminder and a record. It says people have always come into the dark to see how far the world continues without them, and to return with a story. We reach a place where the tube floor has cracked along a straight line. The crack opens into a deeper void where only cold air moves. This is a tectonic joint reactivated by a small earthshake, even in a single continent world. Plates grind, faults slip, and caves remember. Instruments left in tubes can record small pressure waves from quakes that the surface barely notices. They can record changes in carbon dioxide and radon that teach about air pathways and rock breathing. Caves are not dead spaces. They are sensors the planet made. At last we climb toward another skylight. The floor rises in steps and the sound of wind grows. Above us a circle of pale sky brightens. The basalt ring is rimmed with small ferns whose leaves gather dew from the daily breath of the cave. We sit on the last step and let the cool of the underground drain out of our clothes. The world above is loud and bright after the long hush. That is not a judgment, only a contrast that reminds the body that both places are home. We keep our promise to be precise. Lava tubes form when a basalt flow crusts and drains, leaving a tunnel. Skylights open by roof collapse. Air moves within caves because of differences in temperature and pressure between openings at different heights. Basalt caves do not usually grow large calcite decorations, but they can host lavasicles, gypsum frost, and thin secondary calcite where water and dust provide ingredients. Cave microclimates are cool and humid and change little through the year. Troglobian animals often lose pigment and eyesight and depend on roots, fungal films, wind-blown organics, and guano-based food webs. Bats use caves as roosts and their guano supports entire communities. Caves can register small earth shakes and gas changes like slow instruments. Upon those bones we set our quiet walk, a bell shaft that sang, a root curtain that rains sugar, a colony that left by sound alone. If this chapter felt steady underfoot and soft underhand, tell me where to go next. The river cities that braid trade across one continent like light into cloth. The fog-bound coast where calendars are written in tide and wind. Or the far ice where the horizon is a line you can hold in one breath. Your vote becomes our next quiet map. Let the last of the cave cool slip from your sleeves. The open air lifts you like a gentle hand. Behind us the dark gathers itself without complaint. Ahead the plane waits under a sky that remembers everything. The road continues. The night is kind. Sleep well.